not texting, I'm using it for the Bible verse. There was a particular version I didn't have a hard copy of. For everybody who was just up here singing, can I get all of the kids to stand up? If we can get a round of applause for these guys. Because the majority of them sang that with little to no practice whatsoever. Well, we didn't have much time at all to get this together, and they did amazing. So they were awesome. And another shout out to, I don't know if you noticed him, his mom didn't notice him earlier this morning, that he's sitting right here. He was doing our lights, Colin over by the panel. And he told me what to do for her. So I ran across a phrase earlier this week that hit me in a way that I had never thought about it before. And it speaks in terms of a balance. And the phrase that I heard actually came from a YouTube video I just happened to be watching. I don't know if any of you guys have these moments, but you just get in this haze where you just go from one YouTube video to another and you don't really know what you're watching anymore, and suddenly you end up on something you had no idea how you got there. And this phrase actually came from like 4 or 5 videos that I just watched and then suddenly come across it. And what the phrase says is that God rules with 2 hands. God rules with a hand of mercy and a hand of justice. And it creates a balance. And I had never thought about it that way. And he goes on to explain how one can't go without the other. That if there was too much mercy, it'd be out of balance. If there's too much justice, it'd be out of balance. And to prove that point, if God ruled with mercy alone, it would promote complacency. If we had no fear of any justice, of any structure, or of any punishment, of any degree of his death, what would be the point of me standing up here preaching to you? Because nothing I could say to you would take you away from heaven. He'd forgive you for what you did, even if you didn't know you did it. He'd forgive you for what you did, even if you didn't care that he didn't like that you did it. If he ruled with just mercy, everyone would get into heaven for no reason whatsoever. There'd be no reason to fear. We could do what we want. And on the flip side, on the total opposite, if God ruled with just justice, there'd be no reason for me to preach here, because nothing I could say could ever get you out of hell. Nothing I could say would ever make you not a sinner, because we are all sinners. And even one sin damns you. And that's what the balance comes in. Without one or the other, they may be polar opposites, but they have the same result. There'd be no reason for preachers. There'd be no reason for pastors. There'd be no reason for churches. There'd be, in a lot of cases, no reason to care. And so when you look at it, if you rule with just mercy, it's too lenient. If you rule with just justice, it's too strict and it takes away hope. And hope is crucial. Hope is a part of our society. Hope is a part of us. It's a part of how we were made. And to prove this point, there's a quote in a very famous movie series, and this one was a very recent movie, Rogue One, in the Star Wars series. To set the scene, they thought it was abysmal. They didn't think they could win the fight. They didn't see any chance at all of winning, and they were ready to throw it up, say quit. And the main character goes, rebellions are built on hope. And I take it one step further. We are built on hope. Without hope, we're nothing. If we didn't have the hope of salvation, why would we be here? Why would we want to strive to be better? Why would we want to improve ourselves? Why would we listen to his teachings in any meaningful manner? Because if we didn't have that hope of salvation, then we were screwed, really. We don't have any chance of help or acceptance. And a verse that reinforces this, 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. It reads, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish,
spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. And what that verse speaks to us, and it shows us that hope of salvation, that hope that we can improve, and that there's actually hope for us, our sinners, the people that Christ and God don't even have to look upon. There's hope for us. And it also shows that there's hope to live without the hardship in this world, without having to get up every morning at 5 a.m. to get your kids ready for school and then go to work yourself, without having to feel terrible when you get home and still have jobs that needs to be done, to feel like you don't have to use your day off to clean up around the house and get chores done that have been waiting for weeks. All those trials and tribulations that seem remedial, of course, but they won't be there when we get to heaven. We have a life after this without pain, without hardship, and without want. And that hope is what drives it. That hope is what gives us meaning. That hope is what makes us want that. And if there was no hope of that salvation, if there was no hope of that afterlife, you can take it one step further. Why would we work? Why would we go to a job and try to live our life day to day if there was no hope for anything more than this? Why would we care about a lot of the things we do? Why would we care about each other? Why would we care about our family? Why would we care for the friends and the community that we have if everything was abysmal, if there was no hope? Society is built on hope. And it just shows itself in many ways. And so it goes to show that even aside from Christianity, if you look away from Christianity, Christianity is built on hope. But let's take a step back and let's look at society without Christianity, which is becoming very rapidly more popular. If you look at society as a whole and church or state without church, per se, there's always hope. There's a hope that the people you vote for are going to do what you feel right. There's a hope that things will get better. There's a hope that there's going to be world peace one day. There won't be wars. There's a hope that there won't be murder on the streets. There's a hope that there's no more crime. There's a hope that you don't have to be scared of the stranger walking down the street. And there's a hope that you can live in a world that you don't have to be scared of everything. And that hope's always there, but it's not ever really talked about. It's always the underlying hidden scheme of things that kind of ties everybody together, that makes people move. Otherwise, there'd be a lot more people that wouldn't even get out of the bed in the morning. And so hope comes from that balance. It comes from that balance of punishment and forgiveness. It comes from that balance of sympathy and the lack thereof of sympathy. And it comes from the balance of understanding and disagreement. And of course, it comes from the balance of justice and mercy. And to further show that that balance of hope permeates even the things that we make, take a look at comics and movies. What are superheroes without supervillains? Look at the Joker and Batman. Would one either be nor better or worse if the other wasn't there? The Joker came out of nowhere because of Batman, and the Batman rose to the occasion to fight Joker. If neither was there, then there would be no point for the other. If Batman didn't have a Joker to fight, there'd be no Batman. And if there was no Joker, there'd be no Batman. Sorry, vice versa. If there was no Batman, there'd be no Joker. And you can take a look, and that's in every comic and every movie, including the Marvel movies. Take a look at the original Iron Man movie. When you watch through it, the backstory that they create in the movie, Tony Stark became Iron Man because of an evil presence. His convoy got attacked, he had a shrapnel shot into his heart, and they had to create this sci-fi tech and basically rebuild him almost like RoboCop. Then it kept him alive. But if there was no terrorist attack, if there was no threat, if there was no issue, Tony Stark wouldn't be Iron Man. And if there was no Iron Man, there'd be no terror. It's vice versa. They play off each other. It's a push and pull. It's a yin and yang. And it permeates even further. What is good without evil? If we never had evil in our lives, we'd have nothing to say is good. And if we never had any good in our lives, we'd have nothing to say is evil. If there was no crime, then how can we tell an exceptional citizen? And if there was no exceptional citizens, how would you be able to tell there was crime? If nobody committed a murder, then would everybody be the same? If there was no thieves, there was no murders, there were no crime whatsoever, then would there really be an exceptional citizen? And if there were no exceptional citizens, would there ever be crime? Without one or the other, you can't recognize the third. If this entire society was built upon murder and stealing and thievery and backstabbing, then is it murder? It's just society. And so without that push and pull, you wouldn't be able to recognize the extremes. Everybody would be the same, everybody would be in the center, and there wouldn't be that balance. And the same can be said with happiness and sadness. If we didn't have our bad days, our good days wouldn't feel so good.
That's right.
If we didn't have the days we worked, our days off wouldn't feel amazing.
That's right.
And so we can't truly understand what they are without the goods and the bads, without the roller coaster ride, without the push and pull.
You don't know how to feel sadness, you don't know how to feel happiness.
And it goes even further, jumping back into Christianity, what would sin be if there was no lack of sin? If our entire society lives in sins as it does, but did not pursue lack of sin, would it be sin anymore? Would we even recognize the fact that it's sin, or would we just be oblivious to it? Would we be oblivious thinking that there's no way we could live any better than this? It's just who we are. It's how we're made. Like, why would I not murder somebody that I felt like murdering? Why would I not steal something that I wanted? Because that's what everybody else does. So if God hadn't sent Christ, it would have never created that balance. Without having a person who lived a sinless life, we would never know that a life without sin was possible. He spent more years than mine without ever sinning, and I've already sinned way too much for that to count. But if we didn't have that as a basis, as a standpoint, as a grounding point, would we recognize the fact that we could live sinless, or would we just be oblivious to it and just accept the sin and say, it's okay, nobody else can do better? And then you can take that balance aspect, the push and pull, to whole new levels. The first being evangelism. I like to think of our barbecue first. A lot of the times the way we do outreach programs, we like to get to know the person before we start quoting scripture, before we point to the Bible, before we overwhelm them with more information to the point that they get turned away. And it requires that balance. Now, you can't evangelize without the Bible, but you can't get through to somebody without being their friend, without coming to their level without the Bible, in a sense. One without the other gets you nowhere, but both together in a balance is what takes you that step closer. That's what gets you closer to the person. And I had an instance of this happen, I want to say it was about a month ago now. I was working in Sherwin-Williams, and it was me and my assistant manager on shift. And I've grown really close with everybody that I work with at Sherwin-Williams. It's a really close-knit place. We're all really nice. It doesn't feel like an employee-to-manager relationship. And one day, another lady comes in, and she was a Christian woman. And she began to ask us, of course, while we were tending her paint, if we were Christians. And I told her that I'm a youth pastor. And she began to evangelize to me. She began to tell me her story of her youth pastor and what affected her, and how certain things in her life made it very obvious to her how impressionable children were. She said in her church, when she was a kid, she could tell the pastor was not living what he preached. And she didn't give me details, but she was able to see it before people would assume she could see it. And that grew up with her to a point where she still to this day mentions it. And that's one thing she told to me. She's like, make sure you live what you're preaching, because if you don't live what you're preaching, these kids will never listen to you, because they can tell. And as she was going on this, she ended up staying in the store for an hour. Reminded me a lot of my granddad, very long-winded. And she began witnessing to my coworker, Alex, my assistant manager, who isn't a Christian. And she was very wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Very straight to the point. No getting to know you. No, hey, how are you? How's your life? How are you doing? It was, do you go to church? And he goes, no, I'm not really in church right now. It's like, oh, well, I pray that you get to go to church and that you become to know God. And now, that sounds good. And it is good. And that's what we're taught to do. That's how we're taught to evangelize. We're supposed to speak God to people. But that turned him away so fast. I could feel it as soon as she mentioned it. He didn't want to have another word with her, because of how quickly she didn't care about him, but of him in church. She didn't care about the person standing there. She cared about the soul. But she didn't treat the soul as a person. She treated the soul as an object. And he immediately, discredited the majority of what she said. He didn't want to continue the conversation. He sat there awkwardly. He was polite about it. He wasn't rude. He smiled. He agreed. But afterwards, they talked about it. And he didn't enjoy it at all. He felt very uncomfortable and felt entirely shut out, per se. He didn't want to hear what she had to say because it felt like she wasn't talking to him as a person. And I felt that way when she was talking to me as well. She didn't necessarily ask questions about me. She just wanted to reassure that I was in church and that I was doing God's work. And this was the nicest lady I have met in a very long time. That's coming to Sherwin-Williams, I'll say, because we get some very rude customers. Paint prices are high and people don't like it usually. But she was very nice. She never questioned a thing. She was super polite, and I would never say a bad thing about her, because she was that. She did it by the book. But in today's society, the book doesn't work like that anymore. And it was very obvious in the way that it felt to me, and the way it felt to him, and the way I could tell it felt to him. Like his body language very much changed when she got on the subject. And that's not to say what she was doing was wrong or what she was doing was bad. And I think it takes those people to minister to a lot of people in certain situations. Because I definitely could not walk into a store and randomly start talking to people about God and just be like, hey, how are you? Nice to know you. I'm a youth pastor. It's like, that's not who I am. I would be more likely to get to know the person and have them find out about who I am just from being around me than I would to just offer that information immediately. And I think it needs that balance. You have to have the people that are ready, gung-ho, they're ready to talk to every single person they meet, to ask every single person, are you walking with Christ? Do you feel good in this? Are you a Christian? If we didn't have those people, we wouldn't be able to reach certain people. But if we didn't have the others, then there'd be nobody to minister to the ones who do shut out the church and to shut out the Bible as soon as it's mentioned. And that's partially due to the bad rap a lot of people give us now. Not us in particular, but in Christianity in general. We've all heard the bad rap of Jehovah's Witnesses. Everybody hates how they'll knock on their door early in the morning. They don't want to hear anything about it. They don't give them a chance. If you came to their door dressed up in a white t-shirt, a black tie, and if you asked them if they had a moment to talk about Jesus Christ, they're more than likely to slam the door in your face. And that's just because that's how society views it. Because they have this very gung-ho, straightforward strategy, and it works in certain cases. But to a lot of my generation, they hate it. They despise it. And I hear so many conversations in my workplaces about how they hate Christians and Christianity because of that, because they feel like we're pushing it on them and we're trying to force them into something. And then when in certain cases, in certain churches, they aren't accepted. They come in with a hat on and they feel like they can't be there. They come in with tattoos and they feel like they're in the wrong place and people look at them wrong. And they feel like they aren't accepted in the church that they already feel they're forced to be. And so instead of trying to figure it out themselves, they just say, all right, I'm done. It's just the whole thing's bad. Every church just does this. Every church is wrong. Everybody just doesn't care about me. And that's a lot of the stances my generation has taken now. In a lot of cases, it's because of those previous incidents and those misconceptions that cause people to just shut out Christianity in general. If you walk to the high school right now and you sat down with 10 to 15 kids and you opened the Bible and started reading with them, guarantee you over half have already lost. You've already lost half of them just from opening the Bible before saying anything. If they see a Bible in your hand, they already don't like you. Because the society we live in has those preconceived ideas, those stances where you feel like people act a certain way based on what you've already seen, and because people haven't proven them otherwise. And so you need that balance, especially in evangelism, so that you can be able to reach people in that certain way. And that's why I think Barbecue First and the way we evangelize is so important, because it reaches a certain demographic that the other evangelism can't, and that the other evangelism never will. And so you need the balance. You need both, because you have the good, the evil, the black, the white, the yin, the yang. If you didn't have one, then the other wouldn't look so appealing. If you run into somebody and they ran into a very gung-ho evangelist who immediately opened the Bible, started quoting scripture to them, told them they need to go to church, otherwise they'll be going to hell. And then they take a liking to you because you don't do that instantly, and they look at you in a different light because that's a different side that they haven't seen. They'll accept you faster because of that. And it's a weird push and pull. It's almost like somebody took the wrong step for a person so that you could take the right step. And without that preconceived bias, you wouldn't be able to get to where you're able to get with that person. And that balance, it's constantly shown everywhere. In evangelism, in Christianity, in society, that balance is important. And if you don't have that balance, it very well affects you and shows. The imbalance can mess up your work schedule. Say if you, for whatever reason, got off your schedule, your balance wasn't there, you start showing up late for work, or you start sleeping too much, you start oversleeping, you don't get any sleep, and then suddenly you start falling asleep at work. The imbalance can create problems. If it can create problems in the family, it can create problems in your mentality, and you just don't feel where you're supposed to be because you're out of balance. And that balance is shown throughout the Bible, and it's mirrored throughout the world. For instance, in the desert, when they struck the rock to create the water for them to drink, God said to strike it one day and to speak to it the next. That's the balance, the justice and the mercy. But instead of doing that, he struck it twice and broke the entire regime of the Bible. It broke the lineage, it broke the story, and God had to punish him for that because of how drastic that was. It discredits Jesus Christ's sacrifice. It discredits the constant pattern you see in the Bible, and it discredits the balance. It throws it off kilter, and it shows in that particular instance that God's not a God of mercy, God's a God of justice. And then he struck twice. And we see that in society in so many different ways, especially considering that balance in terms of, say, sports games. When you see an imbalance, you have the popular team, the team that's winning, and then you have, of course, the underdogs. that underdogs always have that little bit of hope. And then people want the underdogs to win, not because that's their team, not because they followed them in any chance beforehand, but because it's like, hey, they're not supposed to win, but if they did, that would be awesome. Because everybody wants that sense of hope, that riding the wave of anticipation, that feeling when something that wasn't supposed to happen does happen, that chance that you get where life says this is impossible, it becomes possible. And that comes with salvation. That salvation is that hope. Life says we aren't perfect. Life says that we're terrible people and that we don't really deserve anything that we can't earn for ourselves. It teaches you to backstab. It teaches you to greed, and it teaches you to do whatever you have to do to get yourself to the top.
True.
And then Christianity teaches the opposite. It teaches, yeah, we're bad. Yeah, we're sinners. Yeah, we aren't perfect. We can't do the best that we could. But that doesn't mean you accept it. That means you walk with Christ and you do your best to follow his footsteps, and that you live with Christ in a way that you hope, and the word again, hope, that you can be the best you can as you are, and not just accept your faults as the inevitability of life. And that's where the balance comes in. That's where the hope is. And that's where it resonates in society. That hope and that balance can be found all throughout. In the movies we watch, the comics we read, the books we read, the stories we create, and our lives in general. If we didn't have the hope, we wouldn't have the motivation. And if we didn't have the balance, then there would be no hope. So I want to ask you, is there anything in your life that's been unchecked without its balance, without its counterweight? Are there moments where your justice or your mercy overpowers the other? Maybe you're too hard on friends and family. Maybe you're too hard on the kids. Maybe you're too easy on the kids. If there isn't that balance, then things get off kilter. Are there times where your justice blinds you to your growth? Meaning you're so set in the structure and the regime of things that if it changed, you just couldn't handle it. You couldn't deal with it. If that structure, if that regime changed at all, you feel like it'd be the end of the world. And it causes you to become complacent. It causes you to stay where you are because you feel that if it does change, then it's not right, and that it's wrong, and that you can't continue to live with it. And vice versa, are there times where your mercy gets you feeling that you feel like you're too lenient, that you get to the point where you accept everything, where things shouldn't be accepted, and you accept what you shouldn't, and it brings you to this point where you aren't changing who you are because you're just letting things happen to you. And again, polar opposites that both cause the same effect, that cause you to become complacent. And that complacency doesn't allow for the growth. And are there times that complacency makes it so comfortable that you never want to? Because God doesn't call us to sit still, and God doesn't call us to never change. And we're always changing. So I challenge you to balance your life. Find the right amount of justice and mercy, the right amount of good and evil, the right amount of superheroes and supervillains. And don't let yourself get to a point where you're just one or the other. Because if you're too much of one thing, then you're not going anywhere. And if you don't have that balance, then you aren't mirroring Christ's life.
bow your heads. Father God, very often we seem to be a generation removed. That the church so often has an inability to communicate with the up-and-coming generation, especially one that you're talking